If you've been shooting on Sony APS-C cameras, you may know that Sigma has made some of the best lenses for a good price. But today, there's a worthy competitor. In my hand is the Viltrox 27mm f1.2, and it's as good as you'd hope your next lens would be. Our lovely friends at Viltrox sent over this lens for review, but they are not sponsoring this video. Before this lens was even made, some of the fastest lens for the APS-C system has been coming from Sigma. They had their 16mm, 30mm, 56mm, and now their new 23mm, all at f1.4. They're a great size and all, but I recently defaulted to using a zoom lens that covers the wide to medium angles, the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8. The full frame equivalent would be like 27mm to 52mm. This 27mm from Viltrox is about 40mm full frame equivalent, which is just in between what the Sigma 18 to 35 would be. And I think this is the perfect all-around lens that you could use instead of a zoom lens. But let's talk image quality. You can definitely expect some good sharpness in the center and even on the edges. It starts to get a little bit better around f1.8 when you go towards the edges, but overall the contrast coming out of this is just so pleasing, as well as the colors that come out of it too. Now, if you haven't shot with a lens that opens up an aperture of f1.2, you can expect a more shallow depth of field, better low light performance, and just good bokeh. Although many people tell you not to open up your aperture as wide as possible because you'd be getting less sharpness and you'd also have too shallow of a depth of field that everything's just a blur. For me, I end up opening up my aperture nearly all the way for these two reasons. Number one is I often shoot indoors, so my aperture is going to be sitting around at f1.4, f1.2, just because I have that low light as my obstacle when shooting video. And of course it depends on how the light looks in general when I'm shooting indoors, but most of the time I'm not in control. But when it comes to photos, I'll experiment with different apertures. But in the end, I generally favor the dreamy faded soft look that you get with an f1.2. But don't be hating, because I also grab my other shots at f1.8 to f4 for portraits and all that goodness. If you're looking for a low light beast of a lens with a great image, this is chef's kiss. We'll talk more about performance, but for now, how's the hardware behind this lens? Well, it feels good in the hand for an all-metal body similar to that of the 75mm f1.2 that Viltrox also makes. If you're considering this for gimbal work, this 27mm weighs 560 grams and it's nice and compact to use. And if you're interested in switching between this lens and the 75mm counterpart that weighs 670 grams, then it's almost seamless. I was able to switch between these lenses at a Bible seminar, and the gimbal held up well with little to no stress or extra stress on the motors. On the front of the lens, we got a filter thread size of 67mm, which reminds me that I have to get an 82mm step-up ring to be able to use with the rest of my bigger filters. Along the sides, we have an AF/MF switch, a metal focus ring, a programmable button here on the side. So this lens is really starting to not only perform like a pro lens, but also feel like a pro lens. On our aperture ring, you'll notice that it goes all the way from f1.2 to 16, or all the way to A if that's where you want to leave it, which is where I leave it because I like to control my aperture with the camera dial. As you look closely past the aperture ring, you'll notice that there is a rubber gasket along the edges of the mount for weather sealing. And as you get closer to the glass, you'll find a USB-C port for future software updates. Software? Hardware? You'll get updates. Though the way that this lens performs, I can't imagine needing to actually improve anything anytime soon. As someone who has been using the Sigma 18 to 35mm a lot these past few months, since receiving this 27mm lens, I haven't needed to use a Sigma lens for a while now. Well, for a month since I've had it. Typically, a camera shooter would lean towards using a 35mm or 50mm full frame equivalent lens, or for APS-C, that's going to be a 23mm or 33mm, but this lens is in between both at the 40mm full frame equivalent. As someone who favors the 50mm focal length, I found myself enjoying this lens a lot more. I'm still able to get a good balance between the wideness of a 35mm, yet feel some closeness with your subject that you get with a 50mm. But how close is close? Well, the minimum focus distance with this lens is 28 centimeters or 11 inches. So this is not going to be your first choice for macro photo or video for those really super close-up images like you would get with a Sigma, but when it comes to maximizing the space that you have with subjects at a distance, this is practical. I love a 50mm lens, but this lens made me forget how many steps I had to take back just to be able to get close enough with my subject. How's the autofocus like? As someone who likes to take portraits, this hasn't given me much trouble at all. Here's some samples during the cherry blossom season that I took this year. The autofocus was spot on. I was able to get the face and eye with no problem. However, when I started to position my subjects far away for full body shots, I had a little trouble autofocusing on the face. Here's a few shots at Zion National Park where I tried experimenting with different compositions at a farther distance. I was using the Sony FX30 when I took these photos, so I don't know if your experience may differ if you're using a different Sony camera with AI built in, like the Sony A7C II or A7CR or the A6700. In order to get those photos, I was either tapping to focus or just using the manual focus. For video, is this lens too noisy? Once in a while you will hear this lens being a little audible, but it's not a big deal. You'll hardly ever notice it. If you're shooting a talking head video like this, not gonna be a problem, especially with a good fair distance. In regards to the focus ring, when you do want to pull manual focus, it's what you'd expect out of most fly-by-wire systems and mirrorless lenses. And it's very somewhat consistent no matter how fast or how slow that you rack your focus. So it's dependable for me. But most of the time I'm using autofocus and the occasional manual focus, depending on the moment. While racking focus in and out, you'll notice a slight minimal focus breathing, but for me, it's not a big deal, and I actually kind of like that quality coming from a lens like this. But how much do you think this lens should go for? Because it's $545. Comparably with similar feature offerings, the Sigma 30mm f1.4 sells at $289. But you'll be lacking the physical buttons on the body. But if you like an overall sleek lens, then go for it. If you're willing to go a little bit more on the wider end, there is the Sigma 23mm f1.4 selling for $549. But at this price point, not only are you forfeiting buttons on your lens, but also bokeh potential due to the wider angle. But who is this for? The Viltrox 27mm f1.2 is without a doubt an easy recommendation for those portrait shooters and even video shooters who don't need a telephoto angle. And if you do, consider pairing it with this Viltrox 75mm f1.2. Without having to spend thousands, you can shoot quality images as if you were spending that much. If photo and video is what you do for a living, then it's no question that you can earn much just by using these lenses. Hobbyists and content creators alike would love this kind of lens to capture beautiful work. If I wasn't talking about this lens, I would be using it for my talking head right now. Overall, this is a great upgrade over any lens that you have that isn't already a G Master for the Sony system. And if you've been relying on a zoom lens up to this point, this is a strong second lens to put in your arsenal. My only complaint with this lens, aside from the occasional focus hunting on subjects farther away, is that Viltrox hasn't made more of these lenses yet. So Viltrox, come on. If you only had money to buy one lens for the Sony APS-C system, it would be this one. Don't wait on Sony to make these kinds of lenses, because you know they'll be priced much higher if you do. If you're looking for a great all-around zoom lens for the Sony FX30, this is it.